A 29-year-old engineer and his 22-year-old brother walked into Glacier National Park in the summer of 1924 and never walked out. No bodies, no verified final location, no cause of death. The records can't even agree on when they were last seen. A century of retellings turned a real disappearance into one of the park's most enduring lost legends. But the untold mystery isn't what happened to Joseph and William Whitehead, it's how little we actually know. Joseph Whitehead was an engineer for the Universal Battery Company in Chicago. Official records generally list his age as 29, though historical summaries occasionally vary. His younger brother, William, was 22 and studying at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The two grew up close, sharing an interest in the outdoors that eventually brought them together to Montana in the summer of 1924. They planned their park visit as a shared wilderness excursion, coordinating their schedules to meet for a multi-day trip. Rather than hiring local guides or joining an organized expedition, the brothers decided to travel alone, relying on their own preparation and equipment. Apart from these basic professional and academic details, very little personal documentation survives to describe their temperaments or their lives before the trip. They exist in the archives primarily through their employment records, university enrollment files, and the registry of their arrival. Glacier National Park had been established in 1910, following years of conservation advocacy by naturalist George Bird Grinnell. By the mid-1920s, the area possessed a functioning administration and a growing visitor infrastructure. The massive Many Glacier Hotel opened in 1915, serving as a busy hub on the eastern side of the park, where travelers could secure lodging and provisions before heading into the interior. Trails and remote shelters made ambitious travel possible, though the terrain remained incredibly rugged. These paths allowed hikers to push far into the high mountain passes, though the backcountry remained entirely isolated once a storm rolled in. This region was far from an empty wilderness. The Blackfeet Nation has held enduring cultural and historical ties to these mountains for generations, regarding them as sacred ancestral homeland. For visitors during this era, the park offered a thin veneer of modern comfort that quickly gave way to vast, silent spaces. An unresolved conflict splits the historical record of this mystery, centering on the actual date the brothers vanished. The Standard Park Archive tracks their timeline from July 19th to July 24th, 1924. Yet a September 14th, 1924 report in the New York Times tells an entirely different story, citing August 23rd as the date of their last sighting. These two timelines cannot be merged. Resolving this discrepancy requires a strict hierarchy of evidence. Original park ranger records, contemporary newspaper scans, and Montana Historical Society documents must outrank modern summaries. Repeated secondary claims do not serve as independent proof. Even the widely cited headline, "Rangers Seek Two Men Lost in Glacier Park," requires verification against the original print page before it can be accepted as historical fact. The geography of their final days exists in two completely separate spaces on the park map. The first reconstruction begins at Many Glacier. A reported observation from an unauthenticated ranger log describes two young men near the Swift Current trailhead, noted as well-equipped and heading north. Their intended destination was Granite Park Chalet, a rustic backcountry facility built just a decade earlier. But a second competing record places their alleged last location miles away on the opposite side of the Continental Divide. This account positions the brothers at Lake McDonald, heading toward the chalet from the west. Because these two geographic coordinates cannot be reconciled, they establish two entirely different search areas. One trail starts in the east, climbing through high alpine passes. The other begins at the edge of a deep western lake. The physical evidence of their final steps remains divided by the mountains themselves. Backcountry travelers in the 1920s climbed steep forested slopes, crossed unbridged creeks, and walked exposed mountain passes where trails frequently faded into fields of unstable talus. Ranger logs from that season contain no record of their transit through the area. In an era before standardized path markers or satellite guidance, even a minor route error in this vertical environment quickly became highly consequential, as rapid elevation changes drained a hiker's strength. No search teams ever reported finding physical tracks along these steep slopes. Today, historical researchers overlay modern digital cartography with early hand-drawn diaries connecting known locations like Many Glacier and Granite Park Chalet with clean theoretical lines. But a plausible corridor plotted on a paper map does not prove the brothers actually set foot on those high mountain paths. According to historical accounts, a telegram from the brothers' mother reached park headquarters, asking for a welfare check. If authentic, this communication immediately shifted the situation from a quiet delay to an active response. A surviving station log, attributed to Ranger John H. McAllister, reportedly notes early sightings of the two hikers near the trailhead. Local authorities mobilized. Park rangers, deputies from the county sheriff's office, and mounted personnel rode out to examine the lower trails, joined by volunteers from nearby ranches and Many Glacier hotel staff. These initial patrols pushed along the valley before coordinating with adjacent forestry agencies to expand the search grid. Early logs from these patrols record searchers sweeping the paths, looking for footprint impressions or dropped gear, only to return with no trace of the two men. These early logs, documenting extensive patrols but recording no traces of the missing party, remain pending direct verification. As the operations grew, search parties expanded their efforts into more demanding terrain. Rangers and volunteers fanned out across the steep valleys, the rocky chalet approaches, and the dense lakeside timber. Searchers moved on foot and horseback, with one team launching a boat to scan the shoreline. They had no helicopters to scout from above. They had no radios to coordinate their steps. Messengers rode miles to the nearest telephone line to deliver updates, meaning a discovery made at dawn might not reach headquarters until nightfall. Every patrol had to haul its own food and shelter through the same vertical terrain they were trying to clear. Heavy summer storms and vast distances repeatedly stalled progress. By the time a searcher checked a reported sighting, the trail was already cold. The operation was scaled back after several weeks of fruitless effort. But covering a trail is not the same as clearing the wilderness. A physical review of the surviving record requires a careful cataloging of reported traces, examined as isolated pieces rather than an unbroken chain of proof. Near the Swift Current trailhead on July 26, searchers reportedly recovered a leather satchel containing a compass, a portion of a loaf of bread, and a pocket knife. But who precisely documented this recovery, and how was the chain of custody maintained? The same question applies to the series of boot impressions noted in the mud nearby, footprints measured at 12 inches but never securely matched to either brother. An alleged $500 reward poster and a Many Glacier Hotel register entry also exist in historical accounts, yet their provenance remains unverified, without direct confirmation from the National Park Service museum collections. Keeping the physical descriptions separate from later theories is essential. Until these items are authenticated through a formal archive, they remain disconnected reports, raising far more questions about where they were found than what actually happened to the hikers. The physical environment between Many Glacier and Granite Park Chalet presents immediate measurable hazards. An accidental fall into a deep gorge or a hidden ravine remains a primary, documented possibility. Along the high alpine route, trails cross sheer rock faces and unstable talus slopes, where a single misstep on wet stone could result in a catastrophic plunge. If either brother slipped into one of these steep chasms, recovering their remains would have been nearly impossible for early search teams using basic rope gear. Alternatively, sudden exposure or hypothermia represents a plausible environmental threat. High-altitude weather in this region is notoriously volatile, capable of dropping temperatures rapidly during sudden summer thunderstorms. A cold, soaking rain combined with high winds can overwhelm an unprepared hiker within hours. Yet while these natural scenarios explain how the wilderness can swiftly claim a life, they remain entirely theoretical. In a physical environment as dynamic as Glacier, possibility does not constitute proof. Without physical remains or verified gear recovered from a specific hazard site, these explanations exist only as plausible theories. As years passed without answers, the disappearance of the Whitehead brothers slowly transformed from a search and rescue operation into regional folklore. Cautionary references to the tragedy began appearing in park guidebooks from the 1930s through the 1950s, using the lost hikers to warn visitors about the unforgiving backcountry. By 1989, a historical reassessment in Montana, the magazine of Western history, examined a later family recollection suggesting a voluntary disappearance, though the personal letters supporting this theory lack verified dates, authorship, or historical context. Other uncorroborated accounts emerged, including a persistent rumor of a suspicious stranger seen near Granite Park Chalet, an allegation entirely absent from contemporaneous police records. In recent decades, the story has drifted even further from the safety of the archives. A 2014 Flathead Beacon feature and subsequent internet listicles added sensational layers, introducing modern tales of ghostly footsteps and mysterious lights near the chalet, spectral details never recorded in the original 1924 reports. These unverified claims continue to circulate online, blurring the line between documented history and campfire myth. A systematic audit of the Whitehead case requires drawing a firm boundary between documented history and lingering legend. In the confirmed category, primary records establish only the initial disappearance and the subsequent multi-week search in the summer of 1924. In the reported category sit the early ranger sightings and the recovery of a leather satchel near the trailhead, events that remain highly plausible but lack direct archival verification. Disputed claims, such as the later family theory of a voluntary departure, lack independent supporting evidence. Unverified claims, including rumors of a hostile stranger or modern supernatural encounters near Granite Park Chalet, cannot be elevated through repetition. The historical record reaches an absolute limit. No verified remains have ever been recovered, no final physical location has been identified, and no cause of death has been established. The National Park Service maintains the case as a historic, unresolved disappearance requiring direct, physical confirmation to change its status. Without a final physical trace to bridge the gap, the fate of Joseph and William Whitehead remains locked in the silent terrain of Glacier, where the verified archives end and the folklore begins. Today, the vast peaks of Glacier stand unchanged, guarding secrets we may never recover. As more seekers venture into this unforgiving wilderness, we are reminded of our own fragile limits. Some mysteries exist not to be solved, but to teach us respect for the unknown. What do you think lies beyond the trail? Share your thoughts below.